I'm Don Kinzler. I'm the NDSU Extension Horticulture Agent here in Cass County, and I'm coming to you from my NDSU Extension office here in the Cass County Courthouse Annex. And it's always my pleasure to be with you for these webinars. And greetings to those of you who have joined me before for these webinars, and special greetings to all of you who may be new to these webinar series. After this evening, the next two Monday nights, we have webinars again. Next week is on apple growing. The following week is on a lawn care calendar. And for everyone who registered for this evening, I'll be certain to send you the registration link for the next two webinars as well. Now, our webinar this evening is Best Products to Control Diseases, Insects, and Weeds. And of course, each of these topics could be an hour or two by themselves. But I thought it would be interesting to just kind of take a fairly quick view on each of these to kind of address the most common questions that we have and maybe some of the best products to have on our shelves to fight some of this pests that we have. So now when we talk about a pesticide, sometimes that term can be a little confusing. Sometimes when you hear that term, sometimes it's mistakenly thought to kill insects, but actually the term pesticide is an umbrella term for killing pests, things that annoy us around the yard and garden. So under that umbrella term pesticide, there are insecticides, which kill insects. There are herbicides, which kill plants. Fungicides kill fungi that cause fungal type diseases. And there's miticides that kill mites, and rodenticides to kill rodents and mice and rats. Nematicides kill nematodes. Bactericide kill bacteria. Well, anyway, you get the message that under that umbrella pesticide, we have all these different products that kill or control each of those different things. So we're going to go through the three that gardeners use most. That would be insecticides for insects, herbicides for killing weeds, and fungicides for killing diseases, or at least controlling them. So let's jump right on in with fungicides. Now, fungicides are products used to treat diseases that are caused by fungi. And most diseases that we encounter in our yards and gardens, most of them are caused by fungi. And it's important to note that most fungicides used to control these diseases are preventative in nature. They need before the disease starts or at the very, very earliest sign of that disease. Uh, in most cases, they can't take and stop in its tracks a disease that is already well established. So it's all about prevention, especially things that we have a history of diseases. Then, such as last year, then we know that, oh, this next coming growing season, we need to prevent these. So if we take a look at some of the commonly controlled diseases that we battle in our yards and gardens, look at that one. Powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is that grayish white coating that forms on a number of different things. Here you see it on lilac. Again, it's a fungus. Peonies. Oftentimes by the middle of the growing season, peonies will just be grayish white with this fungus. And now it usually won't kill the plants, but it sure makes them unsightly. And once that grayish white coating is formed, you can't wash it off. It looks like you'd be able to kind of just rub it off or wash it off, but it doesn't. It is entrenched into the surface of those leaves, and it can diminish the vigor of that plant. So powdery mildew isn't just innocent, and very, very common on perennials and some shrubs such as lilac and ninebarks are commonly attacked by powdery mildew. There are a number of different fungi that cause the powdery mildew, but generally, as we take a look in a minute, they're kind of controlled about the same way. Apple scab is another fungal type disease. If you take a look at that, the apple scab causes the round lesions on apple leaves, also flowering crab apples. The last couple of years have been just absolutely severe for apple scab on flowering ornamental crab apples. It starts with those circular lesions, but then the leaves turn yellow, and by midsummer, in severe cases, the leaves will start to all drop off. And it is stressful on the trees. Ornamental crab apples can maybe just put up with it for a season. But if it attacks apples or crab apples many years in a row, it can really weaken those trees, and it can dispose them to other problems such as winter kill, dieback, less growth. Maybe they won't fruit as well or flower as well. So apple scab. Again, very serious the last couple of years. These last couple of years have kind of been tough ones on certain diseases because we've had fairly wet springs. And fairly wet springs is when these fungal diseases start to get their toehold on some of our shrubs, trees, and perennials. And of course, tomato leaf blight, as you see in the picture there, the blighted leaf that is yellowish with the brownish black spots. Tomato leaf blight. That plagues many of us. Foliar diseases on perennials, fairly common. Black spot on roses. If you take a look at the picture in the lower right-hand corner, the circular black lesions, also accompanied by some yellowing on the leaves, that's fairly common, and it can defoliate roses. Some roses are resistant to black spot, but we can also use some fungicides too to help prevent that. And potato leaf blights that causes the lesions on leaves and the defoliation, the yellowing also, so that the potatoes don't live up to their full expectation. I might also mention, as long as we're talking about the powdery mildew, the first one, cucumbers, pumpkins, and squash are oftentimes attacked by powdery mildew also, and it can cause the vines to totally collapse by about the middle of summer. And then, of course, you don't get much production after the vines start to go downhill. Now, the good news with these fungal diseases, and of course, it sounds kind of desperate when you start listing all of these, but the good news is that these fungicides that help are broad spectrum. You run into that term once in a while. Broad spectrum means that a product controls a wide range of diseases. For example, if we take a look at this product, vegetable, flower, fruit, and ornamental fungicide. When we look at the label, we see that it contains chlorothalonil. That's a mouthful. Chlorothalonil is a broad spectrum ingredient, and when you look at the label to see all the things that it controls, it prevents diseases on many types of things. So this is a good product. This or a similar product is good to keep on the shelf. So at the very earliest signs of diseases on many types of things, this product can be very helpful. And of course, it's always important to read and follow the label directions on all of these. And while I'm thinking of it too, these products, the best storage is not on the shelf in our garage. I've been guilty of this, but on the shelf in our garage during the heat of the summer, heat isn't best. They're probably best stored around 70 degrees or so. And also, one needs to be very careful that these products do not freeze. So in the fall of the year, they need to be put in an area where they are not going to freeze. So if we look at some of the types of fungicides that we encounter at the garden center when we're going up and down the rows of things that we use to control pests. So some of the common fungicides that you see, starting on the left, Daconil. The active ingredient in Daconil is chlorothalonil. So again, when we look at that product, the label, that's going to control many, many things. And so depending on the type of plant, there will probably be a different rate that is used. The next, we have copper fungicide. The copper fungicides are useful for many, many diseases. Next, kind of in the middle, sulfur plant fungicide. So it's important when you're deciding, okay, if you've got a plant or tree or shrub that you want to control a disease, when you start shopping for what product is best, look at the label to make sure, because each of these probably has a strong point. Copper, fungicide, and sulfur probably aren't as broad spectrum, for example, as chlorothalonil, but they do have their use on many diseases. And then, of course, we have organic type products as well. For example, in the upper right-hand corner, that's a disease control. I can't quite see the ingredient on that, but that is an organic type of product. The lower right-hand, neem oil. Neem will control some diseases as well. Mentioned chlorothalonil, copper, sulfur, neem oil, the beneficial bacteria. So lots of good choices. The when to apply is almost as important as the product. Of course, first of all, you need to have a product that will address the type of disease and the plant that you want to protect. But the when to apply is absolutely critical. So the label will usually tell you to apply at the very earliest sign of the disease. So if you take a look at the three leaves there on the left, it's just starting a little bit of mildew. That's at the early signs. The middle picture, intermediate, that's probably too far gone to stop it in its tracks. It's probably already entrenched, maybe a little invisible, but it's going to keep it going. The advanced stage on the right-hand side, where you see all the mildew, that is probably way, way too late for any application. So the earliest sign is when we want to get the fungicide applied. So it prevents the spread to healthy tissue. The other thing that's important to keep in mind too is yellowed or damaged leaves. If you apply a fungicide, they're not going to revert back to normal. For example, a tomato, the lower leaves on a tomato that are yellowed and spotted, no matter if we apply fungicide or not, those yellowed leaves are not going to revert back to normal, healthy green. They're going to be lost. And so that's why the early application is so very, very important, because going back into healthy just isn't going to happen. Now, a couple of diseases that were so prevalent the last couple of years that I wanted to make special note of. I mentioned apple scab, both on fruiting apples as well as the ornamental crab apples. So many of the ornamental crab apples, leaves turned yellow and started dropping and defoliated by about the middle of summer. And the time, if one has been bothered with that the last couple of years, and you're concerned that it could happen again, the application of a fungicide has to be made as the leaves are unfolding in spring. So a person can't wait later on to see will it happen or won't it happen. If we have another cool, wet spring that causes the area to be a petri dish of fungi, by the time we know whether that's going to happen, it's already too late. That fungicide needs to be applied as the ornamental crabapple leaves are just unfolding. That's when the apple scab disease becomes entrenched on those leaves. So very, very early. Otherwise, the fungicide just has little or no effect. The other interesting shrub that I wanted to mention is lilacs. The last couple of years, the lilacs all across the region, North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota, Manitoba, lilacs were hit by a fungal disease called Pseudocercospora. Pseudocercospora. It caused, in many cases, the lilacs to the leaves to by midsummer to become yellow. Then they went to crunchy brown, and then the leaves all fell off. Because of that trauma, many of the lilacs were kicked into blooming. Sometimes if certain shrubs, especially those that bloom in the spring, if they are hit by trauma in late summer or fall, it kicks in a kind of a it what's the word I'm searching for? It kicks in a last ditch effort to perpetuate the species. And so the shrubs are kind of concerned that maybe they aren't going to make it. So they bloom to try to produce seed to perpetuate the species. That's what I was trying to think of. And so lilacs across the region, many started blooming in September and October. Because again, the trauma of losing the leaves early to this disease caused them. And so I received emails from all across the region of lilacs blooming. In many cases, the shrubs were totally defoliated and there was some lilac bloom. And so if your lilac has been defoliated, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to die, but it certainly was stressful on it. So if your lilac was hit and you don't want that to happen again, a fungicide, kind of an all-purpose broad-spectrum fungicide, needs to be applied early in spring as those leaves are unfolding. Later on is too late for Cercospora control on it. So that's the weird thing about some of these diseases is even if the leaves looked pretty healthy middle of summer, that disease could be just waiting to do its thing. And so for apple scab and the lilac problem, the application of fungicide needs to be done when they are just starting to unfurl. Also, also, the rhubarb. Rhubarb can oftentimes be attacked by disease, and the rhubarb diseases can attack both the leaves and the stalks. So, a fungicide to prevent that, if you've been bothered in the past, should be applied in spring as the leaves and shoots are just starting to come up out of the ground. So how to apply these? Well, there are ready to use. You can buy little bottles of pump type spray or dust, such as the copper fungicide dust. And that one you can use just as the plain, dust, or you can dissolve it in water too. So there are ready to use formulations if you only have a plant or two. I like the concentrates, the concentrated products that to keep on your shelf, and it tells how much to mix up in water. And they can be applied either with a little pump sprayer. I uh, I have two pump sprayers. One I use for insecticides and fungicides, and then I have a separate one that I've labeled for weed control, herbicides. Uh, uh, the same sprayer that would be plant friendly for insecticides and fungicides. But if herbicide residue is in that same container, it could damage my plants, if you follow me. So anyway, I have two separate, one for materials that you can put on your good plants, and one for herbicides that you don't want to get on your good plants. So if you follow me, I have a special sprayer just for fungicides and insecticides. and keep the herbicides in a total separate sprayer. Well, even if you don't have a sprayer, many of the fungicides can be applied effectively even with a watering can. They should be applied to about to the point of runoff on the leaves. They don't have to be applied any more. You don't have to douse them down any more than that. But with the to the point of runoff. Also, there are the hose end sprayers, such as Ortho's dial and spray is one example. And you put the material in that, follow the directions, set the nozzle to what it is. One caution, though, with some of the fungicides, they're quite thick. Some of the liquid fungicides are quite thick, and sometimes I've had a problem with them adequately mixing up in the hose end sprayers. Now, we're going to leave diseases behind a little bit, and we're going to talk about insecticides. And again, we could talk probably 2 days about how to control all the many different insect pests. But generally, an insecticide is a product used to kill insects. The nice thing is, many of them are broad spectrum. When you take a look at the labels, they will control a number of insects on a number of different plants. But some products do work better on some insects than on others. So let's take a look at some of the common insects. All right, apple maggot. That is the problem that we see over on the right-hand side, the right-hand photo, that causes brown streaks throughout our apples. You probably don't notice anything amiss on the apple until you go to harvest and cut them and then see brown streaking inside. And so we'll talk a little bit more about apple maggot in a minute. Apple maggots come, the sap beetles that you see on the raspberry in the lower center. They're annoying. Spotted winged Drosophila. We're going to talk a little bit about that. The potato bug, the Colorado potato beetle, the big striped fat bug up in the top. We'll talk about that. Cucumber beetles are annoying. And of course, there's grasshoppers, flea beetles that attack radishes and things. So some common insecticides. And it's a good idea to keep one or two of these, I think, on our shelf at the ready. And so there's a number of different ones that can certainly be used. Malathion has been around for a long, long time. That's very useful. I'm not a fan of the smell of malathion if you've ever used it, but it's quite effective, has good uses. Seven's been around for a long, long time. My mom used to use seven in the garden all the time, and I have as well. Eight. I've become a big fan of eight. It controls many things very effectively. In my experience, it maybe controls a few more things than seven. It's interesting. We've got seven, we've got eight. I'm waiting for nine to come along because that should be really, really good. But I don't think nine has been invented yet. A pyrethrin, you see that on the garden center shelf also. Permethrin is another type of insecticide, and then some organic products called one is neem oil, and another is insecticidal soap. One comment on the neem oil and insecticidal soap. They are called contact insecticides, meaning when you apply that wet product to the plant, it has to the product, wet product, has to contact the insects. It has to coat their body in order to control those insects. They don't have a residual effect or very, very minimal, which means if a little insect like an aphid is hiding down under the leaf or hiding somewhere, and you go ahead and spray it, and if you miss that little aphid, then he crawls out from under his leaf and goes about his merry business. So it's very important with neem oil and insecticidal soap for good, thorough, wet coverage to get all the nooks and crannies and underneath the leaves. They're a wonderful product. It's important to understand the way that they control, that they have to physically coat the insects themselves. The other products tend to have residual. Some last a little longer, some not quite as much. but they have a residual so that when the insects eat the leaves, then they're killed. Neem oil and insecticidal soap don't have that residual. So if even if the leaves are treated, if an insect eats those leaves, they're not going to be controlled by those product because they are contact type. A fascinating product, relatively new over the last probably decade or so, is a wonderful product called spinosad. Spinosad. It's got a wonderful history. And it's effective on many insects. There was a soil scientist who was visiting one of the tropical islands down south. I don't remember which island it was, but he was walking along the beach, and there were lots of tropical insects around. And then when he got to a certain stretch along the beach, he observed that there were no insects. And it was an area where there was an old rum distillery. And so he did some checking, as a good scientist would, and he determined that the a byproduct of the rum distillery, the bacteria were creating a a natural type of insecticide. And so the scientists were able to kind of isolate that product and replicate it. And so spinosad is cleared for organic use, and it's very, very effective on many type of things. It's a residual type product, so you don't have to physically coat every little insect with it. It leaves a little residue. The nice thing is it doesn't leave a long residue, so it breaks down, making even vegetables safe. You observe the waiting time on the label. And so that soil bacterium converted products to a kind of an exciting insecticide. So we need to match the insect with the right insecticide. So that means we should first identify what insect is attacking our plants and then look at the label to make sure that the product you're choosing is going to control that insect. Now, I want to talk about apple insects specifically for a little bit because we all take our apple crop seriously. And there's nothing more disappointing when you've babied those apples along, watched them grow all season long, and then when you go to harvest them, you cut open them and they've got insect problems. Or they're going along pretty decent, and then even on the outside, you see blemishes and problems, and you cut them open. And so this first photo is of codling moth. There are two insects that are the worst insects for apple. And the first is codling moth. The codling moth lays eggs on the little tiny fruit right after the blossoms drop. So when the blossoms are dropping, probably end of May, 1st of June, the codling moth lays a little egg on that little teeny fruit, and that egg hatches into a larvae that is inside the apple, and it just makes a total mess of the apple. And sometimes the mess isn't even obvious from the outside. So for codling moth, the control is very tricky. It needs to be applied really early, right after the blossoms drop off the tree. The good thing is that the blossoms are going to be gone when you spray. And so the bees and pollinators are no longer visiting the apple tree because there's no blossoms there to visit. So as soon as those flower petals drop, that's the time to apply spinosad, malathion, pyrethrin, something like that. So if you miss that opportunity, that codling moth has probably laid eggs, and that egg is going to already be in the apple. And so spraying after that is going to miss that golden opportunity for control. One product that I really like to keep on the shelf for because it's a double duty product, just fruit tree spray is generically called. There's a couple of different brands of them, but fruit tree spray, when you look at the label, they indicate they will control diseases such as apple scab, and they control apple insects. So check your particular product to be sure it controls codling moth. And so a good all-purpose spray. Again, but spinosad, malathion, pyrethrin, they work well too. The next apple insect that we have, the second of the two, is apple maggot. And that's the one that causes all the brown streaking on the inside. Now, the apple maggot adult is a fly. You can see the black flies that have been trapped on those, excuse me, those round kind of apple-like traps that you can buy and coat with sticky substances. And the apple maggot the adult fly begins usually in about late June. It is weather dependent how quickly they come about, but about late June or early July, they start invading our area. The nice thing about putting out those red traps is you can monitor, and when you start catching one or two of them, you know it's time to spray. And then the sprays that a person would put on, spinosad works great, malathion, permethrin, as I mentioned, the fruit tree spray, that works very, very well. Now, if you decide to use just the sticky traps, an apple tree probably, depending on the size, needs 6 to 8 or so of those traps. 6 to 8, maybe even up to 10 or 12 of those traps to give good control. But they're very beneficial, especially for monitoring to see if the apple maggot is there and active. And if the apple maggot isn't active yet, well, then you can delay spraying. It is important to follow the directions too on the label because you do need to spray every 10 to 14 days. And the apple maggot fly does keep laying more eggs until a point in August. So about the end of June, then maybe middle of July, end of July. And so you do need to do a number of sprays. But I've found that even a few sprays spray applications greatly reduces the apple maggot problem. Okay, next we move on to this little insect that is so annoying. It's called the picnic beetle, also called sap beetle. It's a little black beetle with tannish spots, and it attacks strawberries, raspberries, a number of other type of fruits in our yards and gardens. And they're just so annoying. When I was a kid picking raspberries, we never had to worry about these, but they are so prevalent now in raspberry patches. The other thing that's so annoying, when you pick a raspberry, there's a little hollow cap, kind of little hollow part, and they will hide in there. They don't seem to float out of water very well. You could maybe add sugar to the water, salt to the water, and if you're lucky, they'll float out. But sometimes they just seem to want to cling in there. It's very annoying. And so a couple of control ways. Some gardeners have had good luck with traps set outside just at the perimeter of the raspberry or strawberry area, such as buckets, gallon jugs filled with molasses, water, and yeast. You can do online kind of to see what the ratio should be. And so those traps can attract many of those. And a couple of really good products to use for controlling these, spinosad and malathion. Now, the reason that these two are good products is because they have a very short interval from the time you spray to the time it's safe to harvest. See, if we use some of the other insecticides that have a long residue or residual, then it's not safe to eat. None of us want to eat something that is loaded with an insecticide that is not broken down. But spinosad and malathion both break down, check the label, but within about a day after application, they've disappeared. And so one way to kind of do this is to kind of control this insect is to, as the raspberries start to ripen and you suspect these insects are going to be moving in, is to spray with spinosad. And then after a day or two, after that is broken down, again, follow the label, harvest your berries. Then there will be more berries kind of yet that are going to be thinking about ripening. The next time use malathion. The reason for rotating is these insects become resistant very quickly. Okay, so spray with malathion, wait day, 1 to 2 days, then the berries will be ripe. The insects should be not there. You harvest, okay, and then spray with spinosad. So you do a rotation. Again, always being careful that you observe that waiting period. But the nice thing about these two insecticides, they break down very rapidly, and so that they're safe to use on ripening fruit. Now, the next insect that is so damaging on raspberries is the spotted wing Drosophila. Now, it is a fly. The adult fly is kind of a tannish. If you see the circle photo there, it's kind of a clear winged and kind of a tannish type fly. And what it does is it lays eggs on the fruit and the eggs hatch into little tiny white larvae. If you see in this photo the yellow circles, they are circled around little white larvae. Boy, and if you aren't careful when you pick raspberries, you might not see these unless you look with a magnifying glass and you see these little wriggling white larvae. They're disgusting. And so a similar type of control on these is to alternate spinosad and malathion. So we can be controlling both the little black picnic beetles or sap beetles and the spotted winged Drosophila with this same spinosad and malathion regimen. And it's important to remove fruit that is ripening. The spotted winged Drosophila tends to make the fruits very mushy also. As that little larvae is kind of working in the fruit, it just becomes mushy as well. All right. And then next, I'm going to talk briefly, we could do an hour on this one, but fungus gnats on indoor plants. Fungus gnats, those little annoying gnats that flit around plants. So sticky yellow traps, can monitor for them. They alone won't probably control them completely, but it cuts down. It's important with fungus gnat control to realize their life cycle of these. Okay, so there's an little black adult fly, which is caught on the yellow sticky traps. But before they're caught on the trap, they've probably laid eggs down in the soil. So, okay, the parent fly is dead, but the egg in the soil, probably hundreds of eggs in the soil, hatch into a larvae. The larvae kind of spends a little bit of time feeding on roots and organic matter. The larvae emerges into an adult, and then the adult lays eggs turn larvae. It's one vicious cycle. And so a good regimen is to use yellow sticky traps and allow the surface of the soil to dry well in between waterings. Don't water the house plants until you insert a finger down to the first joint and let the surface dry. But if you feel a little bit of moisture down at the fingertip, let it dry some more. If it's dry at your fingertip, then go ahead. Fungus gnats need surface moisture in that upper inch in order to do their thing. And so letting that upper inch dry a little better goes a long way. Okay, so that'll help reduce it somewhat. And then here is a good then third thing to add to your regimen, and that is, it sounds kind of funny, mosquito bits. But when you look at the label, it says also controls fungus gnats. It's a beneficial bacteria, doesn't harm humans, kids, pets, or anything, but it kills larvae. And so these granules follow the label, but the label usually indicates soak them in water, inoculates the water with this bacteria, and then you water that into the soil, and that beneficial bacteria kills the larvae in the soil. So sticky yellow traps are getting the adults, but they maybe have already laid eggs. The mosquito bits help kill the larvae that hatches. And so, given a little bit of time and patience, this can break that life cycle. Other Another thing some people use are traps of saucers of apple cider vinegar and some soap. But again, that's catching adults that may have already laid eggs. So catching the adults, but also using the beneficial bacteria, mosquito bits, and then letting it dry a little bit. Again, we could do probably a whole program on fungus gnats. Okay, now let's talk about herbicides. We've got to get our weeds controlled. Now, herbicides are products that kill plants. Okay, so herbicides can kill weeds or can kill good plants. So now, what exactly is a weed? It's interesting. I frequently get photos that people send me, photos of plants that pop up in their yards or the flower gardens, and the question usually is this a weed? And I always enjoy that question. Is this a weed? Now, when plants were originating on this earth, was there a category of plants that had no useful purpose other than to annoy us gardeners? There's not a botanical class of plants that are just good for nothing weeds. All plants somewhere on earth had benefit. And so the definition of a weed is any plant growing where you don't want it. If roses are popping up where we don't want them, then roses are weeds. For me in my garden, purslane is a weed because it's a very prolific plant. For others, it's an edible. And so what is a weed? It depends. It depends where it's growing. If it's growing where you don't want it, then it's a weed. And so again, herbicides, products that kill plants. Maybe they kill good plants, maybe they kill ones that we don't like. It's important to realize that there are three classes or categories of both uh, um, products that kill these weeds or plants. Three products. The first there you see are broadleaf plants, such as that plantain. In most cases, we probably call it a weed, but it is edible. Okay, so there are broadleaf herbicides. These are herbicides, plant killers, that only kill broadleaf. So the ortho weed be gone there is an example. If you spray that on your lawn, it will kill only that broadleaf plant. It won't kill the grass plants. Okay, so another type of category of herbicide are those that kill only grassy weeds. For example, quackgrass or crabgrass. This product, again, an ortho called Grass Begone. You could apply Grass Begone to a peony plant, and it would only kill the grass that's invading because a peony is a broadleaf plant. So that category, just grass killers. Or there's a third category, and that's herbicides that kill all plants, such as glyphosate, the ingredient in original Roundup. You see there some, let's see, it looks like wild violet in a kind of a grassy area. Well, Roundup is going to kill that whole works grass, the broadleafs, and everything. So you get the idea. There are herbicides that will target and kill broadleaf plants. There are grass killers, and there are some that kill all plants, or most, unless they're modified otherwise. Okay, why is weed control? I'm a big fan of targeting weeds. Oftentimes, our yards, our lawns are not a blanket of weeds, so we don't need to blanket the entire area with a weed control product. Instead, we can simply target. And sometimes, such as the dandelion weeder there, sometimes it's better to use a mechanical means rather than a chemical means of weed control. If we have hard to control weeds, such as the creeping Charlie in the left-hand photo or Canada thistle in the right-hand photo, fall is oftentimes the best time to control those hard to control weeds. In the fall of the year, those perennial type weeds that are going to come back year after year, they know that the winter's coming, so they're storing up energy down in their roots to survive winter. And if we apply herbicide that time of year, they will carry that herbicide down into their roots almost more efficiently and effectively than at any other time of year. And so usually these difficult to kill, a spring application, and then also, because they'll probably regrow, and it might weaken them a little, but then they come back again, and then the fall. It would be the best time, about the time of frost or even after a light frost would be a good time to apply product. Now, grassy weeds. Now, this is interesting. Here in a lawn, the photo on the left is crabgrass. The photo on the right is quackgrass. And sometimes crabgrass is mistakenly used as the term for just any weedy type grass. But it's very important to know the difference between these two. Okay, let's talk about crabgrass on the left-hand side. Crabgrass is an annual grass, meaning it only lives for one season then dies. It produces seed, and it's that seed that comes back each year. On the right-hand side, we have quackgrass. Quackgrass is a perennial grass. You can see it in amongst the lawn grass there. And quackgrass is a perennial that grows from winter hardy roots and rhizomes. The best way that I identify quackgrass is by digging down a little bit and looking for those pearly white or tannish white rhizomes underneath. Crabgrass does not have that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about controlling these grassy weeds in the lawn. Okay, the crabgrass on the left-hand side there are crabgrass preventers. Since it grows from seed, these crabgrass preventers kill the little germinating weed seeds as they try to germinate. And it has to be put down before the soil temperature gets to about 50 degrees. And on average, that's about tax day, April 15th. Can vary a little bit. So the garden centers, you see crabgrass preventers. And so we mentioned quackgrass. So if you have quackgrass in the lawn, there are no products that will selectively take out quackgrass from a lawn. Anything that will kill the quackgrass, at least currently, will also kill the lawn grass. So glyphosate can be used, but that will kill the good grass too. So a person would have to reseed. The good news is that if the grassy weeds, such as quackgrass, are in berry plants, such as the strawberries, if they're in perennials, there are grass killing products. Remember kind of when we started talking about herbicides, that there is a class of herbicides that will just attack grass, and it leaves the broadleaf plants like the strawberry or a peony, it will leaves them alone. So follow the label to see which types of plants it can be safely used on. Couple of products you see on the shelf at garden centers. High Yield is called Grass Killer. Ortho has one called Grass Begone. And the Bonide line of products, that theirs is called Grass Beater. And I just saw it popped up. What to use in asparagus? When you're at the garden center, check all three of these. I believe Grass Beater is listed for asparagus. But again, do check the label on either high yield grass killer or grass beater. One of those can be used to take out safely quackgrass on asparagus. Now, the last slide before we get to questions is the importance of wise use of these herbicides, especially on lawns, because each year I get a number of tragic photos and emails from people whose tomatoes and vegetable gardens have been injured by lawns. And oftentimes it's a photo, such as the one on the left of a tomato plant, all curled up and misshapen. And that's caused um, when the plants, the vegetables have been exposed to an herbicide. Maybe it was drift from the lawn, maybe it was lawn clippings from a treated lawn that were used in the vegetable garden, maybe it was manure that was tainted with an herbicide. Maybe it was compost that was made primarily from lawn clippings that still had a long residual herbicide. And so very important to be aware of the damage that herbicides can cause. Also, the photo on the right is of a tree that was injured, and the herbicide that was applied went down through, it was one of the types of herbicide, quite potent, that went down into the root system and then was taken up by the tree. Sometimes trees can weather that, but it does predispose them to attack by insects, diseases, and winter injury. So again, just the wise and judicious use to target weeds when at all possible, and the wise use of any products that we do apply. Okay, and let's see. Okay, all right. And I know all of us are going to enjoy spring. I can't wait until it comes. Any additional questions, always feel free to email me. The email address, donald.kinzler@ndsu.edu. I'll maybe leave that up a little bit, and let's go through some of the questions. Again, the reason I want to leave my email address up is we'll go through the questions fairly rapidly. If I'm not able to give enough depth to you, then feel free to follow up with an email to me. Okay, let me get to the top of these. Okay. Can fungicide be applied prior to visible signs of a disease? Yes. I mentioned the case like of powdery mildew to put it on at the very earliest sign of a little bit of grayness. But I mentioned that the importance on apple scab and the lilacs, the importance of putting it on as those leaves are unfurling. In fact, with some of the perennial type, on perennial flowers, some of the diseases, as soon as they're emerging from the ground, that fungicide can be put on and then repeated. So absolutely, fungicide can be applied prior to visible sign of a disease. Next question, is it okay to treat a plant with fungicide before you can see the disease? If the plant was diseased last year, yes, definitely. Should I get rid of the soil in a pot where tomato plants had septoria leaf spot before planting for the new year? I would. Potting mixes can be reused, definitely. The exception to that is if there was disease. These diseases, such as the septoria blight, are soil-borne, and so even though a person cleaned up all the trash, if that was a problem, I would start with fresh soil this next year. Do the insecticides kill the good insects like bees? And that's why it's so important to use them wisely and sparingly, and that's why the good thing about the spraying for the apple insects is the spray is applied to the apple trees after the blossoms are gone, so those pollinating bees are not visiting the apples. Other types of plants that we would apply insecticides to, if at all possible, avoid applying insecticides when the blossoms are open. For example, if it's cucumbers and you need to apply a cucumber insecticide, try to spray in the evening when it's dark, when you can just barely see, when the bees have gone to bed, to try to avoid the exposure to them. So just as it's barely dim enough to see, and then do the spraying. Is there a risk to applying preventative fungicide if there's no fungi? The nice thing about fungicides is they are quite low in toxicity. Um, of the three types of pesticides, uh, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides have the lowest exposure risk to humans and also beneficial insects. So is there risk to applying preventative fungicides? There's a very little risk. If you've been bothered with that disease, then want to kind of get ahead of it, um, then yes, I would spray preventatively. What were the two sprayers you mentioned that you keep separate? I have separate 2-gallon pump type sprayers. Hey, if you um, can, I hope I'm explaining it right. So one of the 2-gallon pump type sprayers I have labeled insecticides and fungicides because all is washed out really, really good. But if there's residue of any of that, they're not going to kill my plant. Okay, for example, if I spray potatoes for potato insects and it had some fungicide from spraying a lilac, a little bit of residue, it's not going to hurt the potatoes. But if I had sprayed dandelions and there was a little residue somewhere and I sprayed potatoes with that, it could kill my potatoes. So that's why I keep insecticides and fungicides in one. I use one sprayer for that. I use a total separate labeled sprayer for herbicides, and I always wash them out, but just to eliminate any possible that herbicides are getting on my good plants. Okay, okay, the next. Do granular herbicides work as well or the same as liquid herbicide? Ah, I like that question. Granular herbicides such as weed and feed. Now, because most lawns are not a carpet of weeds, we don't need to carpet the entire lawn with a product such as weed and feed. When you read the label on weed and feed, the little granules have to cling to actively growing weeds. They don't do a good job of preventing weeds. They have to be put on and they have to cling to weeds that are already growing. So the label usually says that the lawn and weeds have to be damp so the granules will stick to the leaves. And so a liquid type herbicide is much more beneficial, does a better job, and you can just spot spray. You don't need to carpet the entire lawn. Okay, is asparagus a broadleaf? That's interesting. Is asparagus a broadleaf? Asparagus is not in the grass family. And so as I mentioned before, there are grass killers that can be used in asparagus, since it's not botanically related close enough to grass. So, but check those three. I would have to check their labels, which I always do when I'm using a grass killer. So one of those, grass beater, high yield, grass killer, or grass begun. One of those has asparagus on the label. Okay, for house gnats, instead of sticky traps, use a dish with vinegar and a drop of Dawn placed near the plants. I like that. That's a good trap as well as the sticky. How to control the squash vine borer. Squash vine borer attacks squash and can cause total collapse. Squash vine borer attacks beginning probably about the end of June, and they attack the lower 12 to 18 inches of squash stem. So using a broad spectrum insecticide, I like the insecticide 8 for that. 7 would work. I think spinosad would work well, but spray the point on the squash vine from the soil line up at least 18 inches and saturate that stem with an insecticide that's indicated for squash vine borer. And then uh, when that adult, I believe it's categorized as a moth. I'd have to check. But when that adult comes along to lay its eggs, then it will be killed. So at a certain point in June, that squash vine boring control has to go on. Will you go into more detail on pre-emergent on a new lawn? Yeah, we're going to be talking, the last webinar is on lawns. And so I'll make a note of going into more detail on pre-emergence on a new lawn. Okay. I had an apple tree that the apples just totally rotted on the tree. Is that apple scab? Could be apple scab, or it could be a severe infestation of the apple maggots. Apple maggots just make a mess. Larry mentions using spinosad worked great for apple trees every 2 weeks from June to August to control apple insects. All 10 apple trees, oh, congratulations, nice orchard. All 10 apple trees, varied varieties, did well this year and last year. That's great. Okay, now let me check the Q&A here. Okay, lilac bushes. Was that a fungus that hit the lilac bushes past September? Yes, some even bloomed. Do we need to do if it appears this spring? Yes, as soon as the lilac leaves are starting to unfurl, then apply a good fungicide such as one containing chlorothalonil. Would it be safer to spray plants that get the white mold, that would be the powdery mildew, before it is visible rather than waiting to see the actual mold? Yes. If you've been bothered, for example, with lilacs or peonies in the past, or squash vines with the powdery mildew, yes. Well, they're still good and healthy. I've had mold in the past on various plants. Are we more apt to have it again? Yes. The various diseases that attack plants come about in 2 ways. Soil, they can exist on trash also. So that's why if on disease type items, it's a good idea to get them out of the garden or the flower bed in the fall. The other way, some of these disease organisms just float in on air currents also. I've had, let's see, okay, next question. Does a fungicide harm other plants if they get sprayed accidentally? No, that's the nice thing about fungicides. They're relatively safe. And again, watch the label, but there are very few plants that would be harmed if they were accidentally sprayed with a fungicide. What do you do for a shelter belt of lilacs? Yes, boy, and excuse me, we've seen shelter belts full of lilacs, beautiful old shelter belts of lilacs that were just decimated with the disease. And so, what to do with those? Well, one of the sanitation methods, if you had one lilac, was to rake up the leaves that dropped, but you can't do that in a shelter belt, and it's pretty hard to get leaves out of a lilac once they've dropped on in. So if a person had a larger type sprayer that could apply a fungicide would be the route to go, or hope that this year we're not going to have that cool, wet period in spring, and then maybe the disease would go away. We had not had lilac disease like that probably in 50 years or more. Okay, let's see. With the fungicide used in hose and sprayers, do you separate those from insecticides too? Or is cleaning sufficient between uses? Now, if a person cleans a sprayer, triple rinse, and is very sure to clean, theoretically, the same sprayer can be used for insecticide, fungicides, herbicides. I'm I'm just I want to avoid any herbicide contamination, and so that's why I keep the two sprayers separate. But fungicides and insecticides can both be applied to our good plants. Herbicides, we don't want our good plants. So that's why I keep the two totally separate. So I hope I'm describing that okay. I've been storing my insecticide fungicides on the garage shelf. If it doesn't get overly hot or cold, that should work. Should I toss those and buy new ones, given what you said about proper storage? If they haven't frozen, they should be fine. And if they haven't exceeded maybe 80 to 90 degrees, our garage gets hot. And so the upper heat limit could affect their storage too. Storage life on many of these products is probably three to 4 to 5 years if stored well. But again, it's the heat and the freezing that is the enemy of the products. Do you think using broad spectrum pesticides all the time encourages the prevalence of resistant insects? Definitely. Colorado potato beetle has become resistant to almost all insecticides other than spinosad because it's new. And so that's why rotating between insecticide types is so important because definitely you are right. These insects can develop resistance. And then what? We've created insects that aren't controlled by our products. That's why switching things up is so important because you're absolutely right. Colorado potato beetles became really difficult. Can you review the sprayer's use of to minimize exposure to the chemical use? Um, yeah, great question. Uh, Chemical resistant gloves are very important. Making sure that you're wearing the proper face mask if there's any danger that you might be breathing any of it. Um, so making sure that all protective gear and care are used, and then triple rinsing the product and disposing. The label indicates how to dispose of these products, even the water that you rinse it out of. So yeah, thanks for pointing out the importance of the safety. Risk of long-term disease with exposure, example, Roundup and lymphoma. Again, I'm happy that there are alternatives for any of these products. So the whole glyphosate exposure, there are so many contradictory things out there that I always mention to people, if at all, that is one is hesitant to use anything, then certainly go with one of the alternatives. Alternative weed controls, there are we can dig. We can use some of the organic type things. They might not work quite as well, but with persistence and smothering. That was the word I was searching for. We can smother some weeds. We don't necessarily have to use chemical type products. Your suggestion for controlling Colorado potato beetles, currently spinosad is the way to go. And I would switch spinosad and alternate with one of the others to avoid resistance. Do fungus gnat bother all house plants or ones that I may have under lights? I think fungus gnats probably enjoy almost all plants and potting mixes. How about seven for controlling codling moth and apple maggot? The problem with seven, if seven is applied at the wrong time, it can cause the little developing apple fruits to drop. And so I would prefer one of the others, a fruit tree spray or spinosad. Seven can be a little tricky. We certainly don't want to be applying an insecticide for controlling apple insects and then have all the little apples fall off. Uh, Insecticide for box elder bugs. Um, the broad spectrum insecticides usually work quite well, or even Dawn dish soap works pretty decent on box elder bugs. They are a nuisance. How to kill buckthorn? Buckthorn is just a terribly invasive a kind of small tree or shrub. My favorite way to control a buckthorn is to cut it off with the pruning shears at ground level and squirt a little bit of 2,4-D on the cut surface and then cover it with a little bit of soil to seal it in. Let's see. Next one in my raspberry patch, I have been I have both grass and Canada thistle problems. Best practice, attack the grass first. I would attack the grass first. For thistle, a person would have to very carefully just dot the thistle with a little bit of a broadleaf herbicide, making sure that you don't get any on the raspberry plants. Canada thistle can be controlled by a little dropper full of such as glyphosate in the very middle of the thistle. It doesn't have to be totally doused with the product. Can straw from wheat that has been sprayed with glyphosate carry the residue so would be unsafe to use as mulch for your garden? Glyphosate, uh, glyphosate does not have soil residue. Glyphosate is actually deactivated by soil, but in wheat straw, there's more there's more danger from other herbicides that would have been used, broadleaf herbicides, because straw can definitely be contaminated with herbicides. So that's why it's very important to know the source of the straw and to know what the wheat was sprayed with during the course of the growing season, including broadleaf herbicides, because there can be some that will carry residual. So even if it's not the glyphosate, there can be other herbicides that could be on that straw as well. And thanks for being cautious on that. What type of sprayer do you use to spray apple trees? I use our 2-gallon pump type sprayer. With that, we're supposed to keep our apple trees at around 10 to 12 feet high. If they get real tall, then it's so hard to spray up and around. So if we're keeping it at a decent height, then we're able to spray with even a 2-gallon sprayer or the hose end type sprayers that give a little more forceful spray. They can be used too quite effectively. Is rust a fungus? Yes, rust is a type of fungus, kind of a reddish colored fungus. So rust on grass is a fungus, and there are different rusts that do attack. We're almost getting to the end. Missed the fungicide for lilacs that rebloom fall of 25. Please repeat. Okay, the best fungicide for lilacs that were defoliated is the active ingredient chlorothalonil. That's Chlorothalonil, I believe. Chlorothalonil. There are a few different products that contain that, but if you take a look at the label down in the fine print, chlorothalonil is a very good widespread broad spectrum. See, will grass be gone harm my irises? Check the label. Irises are actually not a grass. And so I have used, but again, check the label, grass be gone or grass killer by high yield or bonide grass beater. One of those has iris on the label. You can check these labels out online. You don't even have to go to the store. And iris is not a grass, and so one of those will have iris on the label. I've used one of those effectively in our own iris to get grass out. Will rust grow on rhubarb? Yes, a rust or a similar type fungal disease will definitely attack rhubarb. And now, excuse me, I do think, let's see, let me check one more time for last minute questions. Crane fly. Okay, one question, crane fly, or will we cover that in webinar in 2 weeks on lawns? Crane fly can originate from grass seed. Now that's interesting. As I always say, count the day lost. You don't learn something new. I have never heard of crane fly originating in grass seed. So I am going to do a little checking. So crane fly, I wonder if we've got that in an area. Well, it's a good day because I learned a new term, crane fly. So yes, 2 weeks, I will be sure that we address that. And last question, when is Garden Palooza this year? NDSU Cass County Extension Yard and Garden Palooza is Saturday, April 18th. Everyone who's registered for some of these webinars will get the registration link. Registration should be coming out in a week or so, but save the date, Yard and Garden Palooza, Saturday, April 18th, Shanley High School in South Fargo. And we have a nationally known garden speaker, Charlie Nardazzi, is coming to town to be our keynoter. So looking forward to that. And let's see. Okay, I see a question on the apple class next week. We will mention the insects, but we're going to talk all about the varieties and pruning and many other types of things on apples, besides the insects too. So, well, everyone, thank you again for joining. And these webinars are always my pleasure. And I really appreciate everyone who joins in. Thank you very much.